Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the academic processional.
Opening Convocation, the ceremonial beginning of our academic year. And we've had many of them. This college is 160. This will be our 160th academic year. Long and proud tradition. And we are, in fact, the 6th oldest college or university in North Carolina, and recently cited by Princeton Review as among the top 15% of all the colleges in the United States. We ought to be proud.
We are working on ways to adapt our classrooms to technologies which are part of the college's innovations, and we are continuing to discuss new types of techniques to bring you the best type of instruction that you can have in this new century. At the same time, each of us as faculty pledge to you that we will continue to bring forth the reason many of you came to Catawba, that you will receive an education that's rich in personal attention, that it will be something you just don't put in your head and keep to yourself, but something that you share with others, something which is interactive, and something which goes down the path of life's course, and one that you take with the things that we have shared with you as you go.
What do you want to accomplish this year? Not only for yourself, but for our Catawba community. And students particularly, as you think about that, know that we can't achieve your goals for you, but know that the staff members here at Catawba, as well as the faculty, are here to help support your efforts.
Privileged to speak to the freshmen. I challenge them to get involved on campus and excel in the classroom. As always, I will encourage you upperclassmen to keep getting involved and help us improve our campus.
I'm here to introduce you to fiction writer Jill McCorkle, who is certainly one of North Carolina's most established and celebrated authors. She's the author of 5 novels, 4 collections of short stories, and she's been awarded the New England Book Award, the John Dos Passos Prize for Excellence in Literature, and the North Carolina Award for Literature.
I have often said that I don't come from a long line of literary people, but I do come from a long line of creative ones. The difference is that instead of being placed on the shelf, their creations were either promptly devoured, washed threadbare, or simply given over to the air in the form of stories, often spun and told. When reading Eudora Welty's brilliant book about writing, One Writer's Beginnings, she mentioned how she learned early in life to listen for a story, and I immediately understood what this meant. I too had spent hours listening to the adult talk, latching onto the fragments of things I recognized, names and places. It's a common way to tell a story in the South, what I call the meandering method. And it goes something like this. Hard to do this without using my mother as my example. My mother will call and say, I can't wait to tell you, I've got to tell you what happened to poor Betty Smith the other day. There's the book. But first I have to remind you, Betty's daddy is the one who owned that hardware store that used to be where the grocery store is now. But it burned down that summer we were having the terrible drought. Remember, all my azaleas died. It's the one year I thought I might actually get invited into the garden club, and then envelope lost, and they never called me again. But everybody thought Betty's daddy made me burn down the business himself. But the way he had not been right ever since his wife, not Betty's mama, she died of cancer 7 years ago. color that gets pulled in from the side. I can't claim this method is strictly for Southerners because I have met many people from other places who have the same desire to get all of the pieces on the table and to get the words just right for effect. It happens early in life. We all want to be told a good story, a really good, entertaining story. I've taught creative writing for over 25 years now, and an exercise I've used again and again as an icebreaker in my classes is to tell students that I'm about to say a word, and then when I do, I want them to jot down all the images that come to mind. And then I say the word home. You can imagine the different versions of home I have seen through the years. Every now and then you do get someone bound to and by the facts. I'm from Texas, the population is, the average rainfall is. But what I've received most in these years are childhood beds and kitchen tables, front porches and climbing trees, the smells of food cooking or music playing, and the faces of those family members who fill the space. One of my favorites through the years was a kid who napped on the shelf below the cash register of the Chinese restaurant where his mom and dad worked alongside his aunts, uncles, and grandparents. The slamming cash drawer and orders called out to the kitchen were as comforting to him as a lullaby. Home, universal in what it represents, a refuge, a shelter, a place of comfort. I tend to think the image of that place or time described often also reflects when you're first aware of yourself as an individual, your inner home, the part you take with you. And then all the colorful detail and specifics you can put there to claim it as your own. The parts of your home, your story, that belong only to you. Now that you're here, your perspective of home will change or already has. I would wager it will grow even sharper in your vision and recognition and understanding. I lived in Massachusetts for almost 20 years, and yet the whole while, when I sat down to write, I first had to go by way of Robeson County and into the city limits of Lumberton, North Carolina, and then to the house where I grew up, but also the one where my grandmother had lived. As far as I could tell, the whole world existed in those two places, with the movie theater and diner store safely housed in between. I spent years in Massachusetts with a yard full of snow and ice, and yet my characters were in the thick of humid summers, surrounded by tobacco fields, and always eager to go to the beach. They were eating pimento cheese and speckled butter beans and all the hush puppies they could hold. They said things like, "I'm fixing to get ready and mash that button, please." I once had a character say, "I might could go to that party," only to have my editor circle it and in the margin write, "I don't think this character would use poor grammar, do you?" And I wrote her back and said, "Well, she might would." Because I never knew anything was wrong with that. When I got to college and was in my first creative writing class, I couldn't imagine that anyone would want to hear about where I was from. What could I possibly tell that hasn't been told a million times before? The Bible pretty much covered everything, and anything left behind Shakespeare pretty much took care of. All the good plots are gone. But I had a teacher and dear friend, Lee Smith, who told us we did not have to drink bourbon, chain smoke, and wear a beret to be a writer. There was a great collective sigh of relief. She told us, in fact, that as a 19 and 20-year-old from a small town in North Carolina or from anywhere, that we had as much to say as anyone. It took me a while to believe it, but now 30 years in this profession, I would say that my greatest resource as a writer is that of my own memory. It's why I encourage my students to look back and reach for those moments that for whatever reason remain vivid. I ask about favorite childhood toys and scariest times. I ask about what I call those light bulb moments, when suddenly the whole world is seen in a different way and from a different angle. I suspect a lot of those moments are happening for you right now, and they are treasures. Those moments are also a very important part of your education, and they belong to you alone. They are the details that will distinguish your story and your life from all others. I say things like that, and I'm almost always asked if I write from experience. And I want to say, of course, but then I need to define what I mean by experience. It is my life just as I've lived it, yes, and to the horror of friends and relatives, it's their lives just as they've lived them. But the real experience we often overlook is that of our own imagination. All those times you leave a situation only to second guess yourself, wish you had done it differently. And so you climb up on that stage of your mind where you are the star 24 hours a day, every day of the year, and you rewind everything and you do it over. We spend much of our lives examining the path we did not choose and imagining what might have been. And those imaginings did not really happen, and yet they grew out of our own reality. And by way of thinking through the possibilities, you do have a sense of what you might have felt, known, lived, and thus experienced. And then it's not such a stretch at all. The writer Flannery O'Connor believed that we have all that we need by the age of adolescence to be a fiction writer. And by this she meant all that we need in the way of emotional experience. The analogy I often use is that of a box of Crayola crayons. Thinking first of the big 5-pack you probably knew in kindergarten. No mistaking one color from the next. Red is red and blue is blue. And in the same way, your emotions are just that clear and primal. I hate you, I love you, I'm mad, sad, happy. And then, in the name of education and sophistication, you grow into the 68-pack, and there you are, wrestling with things like burnt sienna and periwinkle blue, Tahitian peach and puce. But boil them down, and you're right back with that primary palette and what you know clearly and simply. And your emotions are the same. You likely haven't lived long enough to have just lost the love of your life after 55 years of marriage, but you've lost someone or something you love. You know what grief feels like, and you know joy, you know fear, you know love. These abstract words are universal. They bind us to each other by way of knowledge and experience. It's why the same stories get told again and again, and we appreciate them. We recognize them. But then we take the abstract and make it specific. The more specific, the better the story. And we claim it with our own details. Color in your home, your geography, your interests, your memories, your lessons. You don't have to be a writer to have a story. We all have a story to tell. And I encourage you to make the most of yours, to let your story and all that makes your story your own be a part of your education, the one here at Catawba, as well as the one that continues throughout your life. And I want to end with, I often end my classes with a poem, and this one by the poet B.H. Fairchild, and I think a perfect example of what I have been trying to say. And it's called The Story. It has no name and arrives from nowhere, eager for new adventures. the murmur and cries of the crowded streets of Istanbul or Rome or Brooklyn, the blazing eyes of the last gray wolf deep in a cave in New Mexico, the sob of the wind between the disc of an abandoned tractor on the high plains, the homeless man chasing his runaway grocery cart down Sunset Boulevard, a young woman looking out from the front porch of a duplex in Enid, Oklahoma, waiting for the mail. It has, as they say, a mind of its own, bearing secret knowledge, truths from another world, transparent and untranslatable, luminous and cryptic. It arrives almost silently, only the slight crush of long grass beneath its sandals, a surprise even though you have somehow expected it. Your hands, rough and calloused from the toils of the imagination, reach out to gently shake its narrow shoulders, to tousle its well-combed hair silvered by moonlight. Where have you been? It says nothing, of course, walks to the far corner of the room and begins to pray. After waiting for hours, you offer it coffee and a slice of pecan pie, then more coffee. When it leaves, you follow close behind in fear and a traveler's anxiety. Where can a story end? If it arrives from nowhere, where can it end? But then, as you pass through familiar streets, past the clapboard houses, the pomegranate tree just coming into bloom, the blue Buick parked by the curb, you understand, for there is your mother among the bird cries of the porch swing, reading a letter from a small island somewhere in the Pacific. There is the front door with its torn screen, the voices of a soap opera from the radio, the creak and whisper of cottonwood branches overhead. This is where the story ends. And now you know this is also where it begins. And you lean into the light, put the pen to paper, and write. May you thrive and grow and find your own story. Make it messy.